Now let's take a look at the assignment for problems. These were practice problems that were given to you to practice if statements. Before we get started, I want to show you two options. So from the Tools menu, you can always go into Options to change things. And I'd like you to make sure that you're aware of one thing and that you know about the option to change another thing. So from here on in, I expect you to always require variable declaration. So you notice how this little checkbox is not checked? If you look in your options, you should see a check mark there. If you don't, click it. This will include the option explicit keyword. The other thing that you may want to do is to go into Advanced and change the SDI development environment. This changes the layout of Visual Basic, and it turns all of these windows into separate windows. Some of you may prefer to work that way. Experiment with it and see if you like it. So now let's take a look at the code. There were 4 tasks that you were asked to do. So I'll pull up the first one, which was to ask for a password when the form loaded. So here is the event procedure for the form load event. So whenever the form loads, this event procedure will run. Of course, you have to declare your password. You have to acquire your password from an input box. And notice how the password was declared as a string. Then you need to use your if-else statement. So if your password is the correct password, and notice how I've set it up here, and notice how there are quotation marks around my password, then you thank the user and you tell them that they were successful. You don't need to do anything more. The form will simply load and your program will run. But if this first Boolean expression evaluates to false, you end up going into the second block of code where you tell the user, first of all, that they got the wrong password, and you end the program. You don't let the person in unless they get the correct password. So this is as succinct as it gets in terms of code. You could use different approaches to storing your password, but this is one way to do it. Let's look at some of the other programs. So for example, even or odd. Determine if a number is even or odd. So again, all we need is one variable, number. We acquire the number from an input box, and notice how I take the value of the input box. If I don't do that, I end up in trouble. Always, if you are working with numbers, take the value. If you're working with strings, do not use val. Here is our conditional. It's an extended if statement. We have our true statement, and we have our false statement. Here we have the Boolean expression. So what this does is it checks to see if the remainder when you divide number by 2 is 0. So again, the remainder is 0 when you divide a number by 2, and that means that it's an even number, because when you divide any number by 2 and it divides completely without any remainders, that's an even number. If you have a remainder, then this first expression is false, and you have to run this second message box and tell the user that it's odd. By the way, let's say that you are asked to find out if a number is a multiple of something. So let's say it's a multiple of 14. How would we change it? Well, we could use this exact same code, but the only thing we would have to do is we would have to take our number and divide it by 14 and ask the same question. If our number divided by 14 is 0, and it's if the remainder when we divide our number by 14 is 0, then, well, it's a multiple of 14. Otherwise, it's not a multiple of 14. And you can apply this code in any situation where you need to find out if it's a multiple of something, because even And odd, you're asking if it's a multiple of 2. If it's a multiple of 2, it's even. Now let's look at the street names. This has caused some confusion, and I've kept it extremely simple. So prompt the user for the name of their street, and tell the user if it belongs to the first or the second half of the alphabet. We're going to assume that A to M is the first half, N to Z is the second half. Now, we're going to keep it simple. All street names are going to be uppercased, so we don't have to worry about lower cases, we don't have to worry about numbers or anything like that. It keeps it simple. Of course, we have to declare our input variable as a string. Here we have to acquire the input variable. Notice how I did not use val. Next, we need to do our if extended statement. So we have our if statement, followed by our extended statement. And if it's true, this first block of code runs. If it's false, that second block runs. Well, this is pretty simple. So the first half of the alphabet is anything that starts with A all the way through M. So if you had Morley as your street name, for example, Morley, spelled like this, well, M followed by O comes before uppercase N in the alphabet, which means that this first expression, this Boolean expression, evaluates to true, and we display this particular message box. Otherwise, we display the other message box. Let's finish off with plants. So we are asked to prompt for 2 plant names, and then to determine which one comes first in the alphabet. So in this case, we need 2 variable names, plant 1, plant 2, and they both need to be strings. We acquire both as input, and again, notice how I'm not using val statements, and then we do our comparison. If plant 1 comes before plant 2 in the alphabet, then we tell the user that. We tell the user that plant 1 comes earlier in the alphabet. Obviously, if plant 1 doesn't come earlier than plant 2, well, then we can tell the user that plant 2 comes earlier in the alphabet. In this case, again, I am assuming that the user will never input the same plant name. That's a simple requirement for this particular assignment. Like I said, we're keeping it simple. As a bonus, why don't we take a look at the other code? So the months program we already looked at in the video for the compound if, or not the compound if, for the nested if, and notice what I did with it. My first few if and else if statements all check for the errors, and then my else assumes that everything else is good. But if everything else is good, I still need to do something with it, in which case I need to tell the user which month they entered. For the compound if example. So in this case, we were given this example on the overhead. We acquired a grade from an input box, and notice how I took the val of that input box to make sure it was a number, and I declared our grade as a single. And you'll remember that when you apply this particular set of if statements to any sort of input, you are going to have problems if you enter any public school grades, because they're going to get classed as middle school. So there are a number of solutions to this particular problem. One of them is to take public school, move it up by 1 condition. So in this case, first we check to see if the person's in high school, then we check to see if the person is in public school, and then finally we check to see if the person is in middle school. Now, there is one slight problem with this last check. This equals does not belong there because grade 9 is considered high school. This now makes this entire block of code correct, and we could simplify this even by taking out all the else if material and just leave it as else. If your grade is greater than or equal to 9, then we assume you're in high school, even if you're in grade 22. Else, if your grade is less than or equal to 6, then we assume that you're in public school, even if you're not in school yet. And the last possibility is that you fall into neither of those categories, which means that you are in middle school. So this is yet another approach to solving this particular problem. And last of all, the letter grades conversion. There are lots of ways to do this. So you acquire your grade from an input box, and you, of course, apply val to that input box to make sure that it's a number, and you declare it as a single, remember that. And then you do your checks to tell the user what to display, your selection. And make sure that you go in order. So in this case, we start with grades under 50, and we work our way all up to A. The weakness in this case is that anything that gets entered that's below 0 does not get caught and is called an F. Well, maybe that's a valid answer. Here's another possible approach to it. Oh, no, actually, that's the same approach. Here is another approach to it. Instead of starting with F, we start with A. So we first check for A, B, C, D, and then we finish off with F. Notice how in none of these cases I used else. If I'd used else, I could have even caught some errors. I hope you're starting to get the sense that with if statements, there are many ways to do them right. The only requirement is that your if statements work and that they are easy to read. So my recommendation is never to make your if statements overly complex, but also not to make them too simple, because sometimes too simple can cause you headaches and can make your code a little more complex than it needs to be. That's a little bit of a paradox, isn't it? Simple ifs make your code complex. Anyway, thank you for listening, and have yourself a great day. Bye-bye.